Hello everyone, this is the Ravens Librarian. Today I'll be talking about the One Piece live action adaptation. I don't have any footage for the actual show and I don't want to get copyrighted, so I'll be using footage from One Piece Odyssey, the game, while I basically just talk about the show. I won't be going full in depth, it won't be a full on review. I just want to talk about it, give my opinion, how I feel about the differences and what they've done. So, talking about the first episode, this one. So the first episode starts pretty much what you'd expect. It starts with the events of also for the morning. I won't be jumping to cut it. I'm not looking to spoil things for the whole series, but I will be talking about it as someone who's already read the manga and seen the anime and the parts that it covers. So I'll try to not talk about stuff that happens after the time of the show, but in the event that I talk about things that occur in the show or that might have occurred in the show based on the anime, please keep that in mind. If you want to go in fresh, please do not watch this video. This is just a fan of the series talking about the adaptation. So I'll try to keep spoilers of the whole series of the anime and the manga light, but just bear that in mind. Sorry, fidgeting with the volume. So in the first episode basically covers a bit from the flashback with Shanks and covers everything from their encounter with Alvida and then the stuff with Morgans and the first Marine base. So everything's setting up the introduction for Luffy. Right off the bat, the things that they changed, it was really cool how they had an actual naval battle for Alvida. It was very short, wasn't anything too grandiose, but considering that there's usually a lack of naval battles, especially early on, it was a real cool touch to have some, cool effects. The inclusion of the Alvida fight, where in this one she was actually a lot more proactive in the actual raid, whereas in the other version she tends to just let her do the fighting. I like this touch where she has her club, but she also has a mace in the shape of her pirate ship. I don't know if it's a goose or a geese or whatever, but that was still a nice touch where she had more than one weapon. It still matches her, style. Another point of difference when the two showed between this and, for example, the anime is this one was a bit more graphic. Not throughout the whole thing. It wasn't like blood and weird things all over the place, but it was it was noticeable the moment that they showed Gold Roger's execution, left any ambiguity and just show you how he actually gets impaled by the weapons. That was a very visceral touch that I wasn't expecting. And later on with the scene with Zoro, which I'll get to later, and the scene with Alvida showing her, because she uses that club all the time in the other versions, but to actually show her hit somebody full force with that thing, show the after effect, that was pretty brutal. Might be a bit too much depending on what you're expecting for the show, but it definitely, I think it's just aiming to be a bit more piratey, for lack of a real better word. And since in Pirate you definitely have much more bloody combat, tends to go along with that. Inclusion of the scene with Zoro and Mr. Seven. That was a nice touch. It was an interesting way of like introducing him and showing off his skill as a swordsman, as opposed to just having him go on a rampage in the Marine base. Even though he does do that, but like after. Like I said, just the inclusion of him with that fight was a nice touch because having the show knowing that certain things are gonna happen has the advantage of able to do a lot of setup because they already know what should and what will happen, and that gives them a good advantage of being able to do some of the crazy world building without having to make stuff up. The only worry they have to do is about not, I guess, going too crazy with it and showing stuff way ahead of time. And of course there's the balancing act, so there's like the scene with Alvida's wanted poster and all the other wanted posters. The fact that some of them are clearly foreshadowing and some of them can serve as just flat out just references to the other versions of the show without it necessarily having to boil down to like they don't overemphasize it, which avoids padding out the episode or giving the audience that doesn't know about these characters way too much stuff to focus on early on. And same for the people who already know. It's a cool touch, but it doesn't waste time. Like, here's all the bunch of things that will happen. There's like one thing that might be a bit of that. It's more to do with the things that they are definitely changing from the other versions of the story. It'll just be interesting to see how it plays into their version of, assuming, the continuation of what they change and what they don't change. In regards to the characters, just from the first episode, I would say that they do a decent job of giving them their introductions to match as close as possible to the original, with the exception of Zoro. But in Zoro's case, his introduction, I think, does work well for his character. I'd say, if anything raises my worry in the first episode is how underplayed the characters are. So just the fact that some character in the three characters do have traits from their other counterparts, the manga and the anime, but right off the bat they might come off a bit one note right off the gate. So hopefully that's something that changes as the show progresses. For example, Zoro, he can come up. In the first episode, he comes off as the very stereotypical cool guy, like, oh, I'm a badass, and I'm just doing my thing with swords, and that is part of his character, but it's definitely less blatant when you actually see his personality throughout the anime and the manga, because there's time for him to flesh out and show way more nuance and stuff. Like I said, first episode, it's not fair to be like, oh, he's too serious in the first episode, this is bad, because they need to get across something about his personality first and then let you see more of his personality as time goes on. And they still keep a lot of stuff from his other incarnations, to make me feel like, okay, no, this show is doing a good job of representing what makes these characters stick. Like him, Nami. Like Nami's introduction is basically the same one from the manga. And again, same thing with Luffy, where Luffy's introduction is like the only difference is, well, okay, that's not true. The changes for his character are in how he gets himself into the situation that is the same as in the anime, where it's like he winds up in the barrel, he gets picked up by Alvida's crew, meets Kobe, and the story continues from there. So the intro for him is rather quirky, because it's like, instead of him getting caught in a whirlpool, his ship is just flooding. So he's at risk of drowning. Because the way he, like, very casually is just, you see him narrating, telling the story of Roger in his own take, and just filling up the bucket, trying to throw the water out. Meanwhile, just chatting up the news crew. Like, this was the most normal thing for him. And obviously the joke of just having his, like, hey, want to be part of the crew? And then the news crew just flies off. He's like, mutiny. It's a very, obvious haha moment from the trailer. But it is still a nice in-character thing for him. I'd say in the first episode, like with the others, like I said, that they may or may not be toning down their more exaggerated personality traits from the other versions. In his case, it's simply the case that he's not too oblivious and not too blunt like in the other versions. But he definitely leans in that direction where, like, he makes Kobe he's just flat out, he just says, oh yeah, Kobe said all these things about you. And it's like, just calls him out and just casually makes remarks, doesn't really think about him. Versus, like, the other moments where he's sneaking around with Nami and he'll make the comments about, I think it's a part where he's hearing the alarm goes off and they're like, oh, you think they found out about us? And then Nami's like, no, it's definitely just a different crew that's attacking the place at the same time. And Luffy goes, oh, that's convenient. And Nami just stares at him, deadpan. And then Luffy takes a bit, but he's like, kidding, I'm kidding. So it's like different but similar in what matters, I feel, for now, because the whole point is simply other version Luffy from the manga or the anime probably would be dumb enough to really just take what Nami said verbatim. Like, stuff like that would be something that would just kind of go over his head. But here, I think, just having him not be that blunt or that, on your face dumb, but still have some degree of, like, simple-mindedness from his other counterpart, again, I think serves the story that they want to tell. That's always going to be, like, a bit of a challenge when comparing this to everything else. It's always trying to see from the different perspectives. Like, on the one hand, this is an adaptation, so the problem is always, are you adapting it just for the sake of it, or are you adapting it because this is a good way of expanding the story and, broadening its audience appeal by, going for people who may have some hesitation to the anime or to the manga. Like, and again, there's, like, always going to be divide and debate between the fans over how much of that is justified, is it justified, and the scale, again, like, how much of the changes are good, how much of it is acceptable, yada 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 yada. Sorry about the repeat loop. And in things that I liked about the changes, like, or just additions, not necessarily changes, like, but yeah, I like the intro for Zoro, especially because it gives him a good chance to show off his swordsmanship skills in an actual one-on-one sword fight, because he doesn't really get that until later on, so it's still a nice way of setting him up early without shifting what actually happened in the Marine base. The introduction of Nami that shares that from the anime. They changed how she gets introduced, see, a bit closer to the manga, but still has her go to the Marine base. And in this case, they actually have her run into Luffy right off the bat, because they decided that having those three together as soon as possible is better for the story. And I do get what they plan with that, even if it's done for the changes of the plot. I still think it works for the characters, because those three have one of the strongest dynamics in the story of One Piece overall. So I gotta teach this guy first. So having the three of them together is a good way of building up their camaraderie and their dynamic as soon as possible, and that's going to help, especially because of one of the biggest changes between this version and the other one is just how much they're changing in terms of the length. That's obviously one of the big changes. Like, I don't know how this would shift animated from the manga to this, but at least from the anime to this, the difference is already stark. It's like 8 episodes to the rough equivalent of like 40 to 45 episodes of the anime. It's like each episode here is longer than the anime episodes, but that's still a big gap, and that's gonna be something to determine as they go on, is whether or not the pacing for the live action is, whereas maybe for the anime it's too long, needlessly long, padding out too much. This live action is gonna be the opposite. It's gonna be too short. They rush stuff, or they don't give characters and events time to breathe. I didn't notice that here, but they're tackling the quick short stuff right now. This is easy. It's gonna be as they go on. That's where I might notice it, like especially in they did it with the Shanks flashback, where they made the conscious choice to it seems they split the flashback, so it didn't complete here. So they're probably gonna save part of it for later in maybe the next episode, maybe an episode after that. I'll see. But yeah, they introduce the stuff they set up here still works very well, because it doesn't really require that much time to develop the things that have gone on. The only thing really missing from early on is that comes later. It's Zoro's flashback, and again the rest of Luffy's flashback. But other than that, there's not. I don't feel like I really lost anything in story-wise from the dynamic between the stuff with Alvida and the stuff with Morgan's. Like, straight up, the thing with Alvida, like, the fact that they downplay the personality, I prefer, just because I feel like her villain personality in the original just isn't that interesting or appealing. And in the case of Morgan's, that's more debatable. He still has most of his pretty one-note shtick. I'd say the best thing they added is not him, but like the setting. So, the Marine base, when they show off his office, best thing they added was all the paintings and statues he made of himself. Just love that. Like in the original, he's got the giant statue he wants them to put up at the top of the base. But here it's like he's got two different paintings of just the most over-the-top, grandiose things about him. Like how he sees himself. That was great. And the other stuff with like the setup, just the wanted posters, like having him there. There's a nice touch. The introduction of, I forget his name, but it's the guy from Buggy's crew. So having him at the bar like the fact that they decided to take that idea from the anime that Buggy made off with the map and flip it on its head. But here it's like we're keeping the idea that he was gonna steal it, just he didn't get to steal it this version. And just having him there in the front of the camera when Zoro sits down right next to the half body of Mr. 7, that's probably the most morbid thing they did in the whole episode. The inclusion of him, because even if you don't know who he is, again, I can't really speak to how this will go for people who have no idea what's going on. I'm gonna have to watch that later, like see if there's anyone who actually watches this blind, hasn't seen the anime or the manga. But just from my assumption, like having him there draws attention to the viewer, because he looks different. He doesn't look like just some regular dude that you might just expect to be in the bar. He looks like he stands out, but he doesn't like draw too much of the attention, so it still works because he's there, you notice him, and then he walks off fast enough that unless you're paying attention or you already know him, because again, like if you already know the show, what it's gonna do, then like I think it's a clever way of setting things up without shoving it in your face. I don't know, maybe I'm being too generous. I don't think so. I'm definitely going to come at this from a more casual, optimistic outlook. I don't need this to be great. Like, I'm not gonna make any bets about it, but I'm definitely not gonna come at this from a super critical or analytical standpoint. It's not me trying to be kind. That's just how I usually do these things. But yeah, see if there's anything I missed. Oh yeah, the final setup. That's obviously right off the bat. That's the biggest shift from the other stories. The introduction of the Marine so early on. It's gonna be interesting to see what they do with that exactly. Like, what's the intention behind having him here so early? There we go. As far as the characters, I think I already mentioned the part of, in terms of how they're presented. As far as their voices, I think they do a really good job. Still need time to get used to them and their own voices for the characters. But none of them stand out in a bad or good way, so it doesn't shift too hard in either direction. So I have to wait and see as it goes on. And last final touch, I just remembered this. Sorry, my brain's kind of all over the place. And didn't really take any notes. But the inclusion of how they use the wanted posters. So having the person walk up normal on stage, like it's a scene, and then have that person's wanted poster pop up on screen and just very very upfront and tell you this is their poster, this is their number, and having them kind of draw attention to it because the character kind of then animates a reaction to it. Just nice touch. They did it without Vita, and at first I wasn't sure if that was gonna be a thing for the show, but then they do it with Buggy at the end, so that's definitely seems to be a sticking point. They'll probably save it for the antagonist. It might not be a thing that they do for every pirate character from the series. They might have their posters lying around in the background for world building, but they're not gonna do that every time a famous pirate character shows up. But it could be wrong, so they might actually do that too. But anyway, that's like I said, first setup episode. Decent introduction. It sets up the new dynamic, so how it's different from the other versions. Main difference just having the trio together from the very beginning. Characters are fairly straightforward and kind of one note at the beginning, but hopefully they'll flesh out as the episodes move on. And the set piece, the locations, the architecture, the design for places, I really like how they build stuff. It looks cool, doesn't look cheap, and it also doesn't look like they're just mimicking. They're trying to give their own style to the architecture while still making it look similar to the original versions. But yeah, that's the first episode. Probably drop the other one. I'll drop one per episode unless I feel differently about something or another. And if you're interested in watching these, I hope to see you in other videos. Take care, everyone.